Co-founder of Inside Higher Ed, the leading digital source of news and information about higher education. I'm joined today by an impressive, thoughtful, and large group of observers of business and graduate education. And because the members of this panel are undoubtedly insightful and because there are quite a few of them, I'm not going to waste our precious time with a highfalutin introduction. Instead, I'll introduce them and we'll get right into the substance. Our panelists are Megan Adams, who's Managing Director for Research at EAB, Tom Adams, no relation, who's President of the Quantic School of Business and, why did I lose the title? Quantic School of Business and Technology, Brooke Elliott, who's Associate Dean and EY Professor in the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Sean Gallagher, who's Executive Director of the Center for the Future of Higher Education and Talent Strategy at Northeastern University, and Betty Vandenbosch, who's Chief Content Officer at Coursera. I'm going to start with a couple of lightning round questions just to level set the discussion and hopefully give us all a sense of where these folks come from on the larger question of the general health and future of the MBA. So first question, in 2019, the US had 710 general MBA programs, about 300 executive MBA programs, and there were 216,000 general MBA students studying in those programs. So 700 roughly MBA programs and 216 students. How many general MBA programs and general MBA students at those schools will there be in 2025? Curious sort of, again, how that, your perspective on that, and in a sentence, maybe give me a sense of why you answered the way you did. Maybe start with Megan, so go in alphabetical order. Megan Adams.
Sure. So I think it depends on whether or not we think the last recession is any guide. But if it is, then the MBA market is going to shrink. MBAs are not a countercyclical program. And I think we could expect the same number of programs because it's very difficult to close down a program, especially a bread and butter program like MBA, but fewer students.
Okay, Tom Adams.
So I think there'll be fewer programs, but 2025 is actually a short time in academia, so I don't think it's a dramatic change. At the same time, I think that the number of students overall in MBA programs is going to expand dramatically. They'll just not happen with the existing programs that the question's framed around.
I wonder why you would answer that way. Okay, let's go to Brooke Elliott next.
Thanks. I think a decline in the number of programs, you asked for a number, so I said 600, but I think an increase in the number of learners pursuing an MBA, and I said 250,000. And it's really just, I think there's an increasing demand for affordable, accessible, high quality education.
Okay, Sean.
I'd actually agree with Brooke there. Fewer programs, more students. In some cases, the MBA is getting more affordable and commoditized, and we're already seeing some of this in the online degree market where you have the larger players getting bigger and some programs choosing to close up.
Okay, and Betty, last.
Also fewer programs, and I think the question is misplaced because we have to think about students across the globe. With online, we no longer have to say American students, it's students anywhere. And there will be more programs in the developing world, but overall fewer programs across the globe and more students across the globe, particularly from the developing world.
So, okay, question two, one of you, and actually it'll probably become clear, it was Tom, said this in the exchange we had in advance of this panel. The MBA is about turning specialists into generalists so that people can lead. That need is not in decline. MBA demand has never been greater, in fact. Based on the answers you all just gave, it sounds like most of you would agree with that statement. But again, if let's go in reverse order. Betty, do you agree with that statement? Does the MBA, is demand for the MBA itself never been greater? And I'm asking in particular because what we're seeing in lots of other elements of the higher ed and post-secondary ecosystem is a lot more interest, and Sean's written a lot about this, but in micro-credentials and in shorter term not that the MBA is the longest of programs, but it's long. And so I want to make sure we're talking about actual interest, demand for the MBA. So Betty?
So the MBA is tough because it has a definition that we're all pretty familiar with, broad, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and it's being usurped by micro-credentials and also by specialist degrees. Many people would say there's an MBA in marketing, there's an MBA in machine learning. All that, in my estimation, is nonsense. There is a need for generalists, but there's a greater need for people who have a T, who are very strong in one particular area and who are broad in terms of management. For folks who learned the vertical part of the T when they were an undergraduate or through work, MBA is great. For people who did undergrad business and an MBA, that need is not as great as it once was, I don't believe.
Okay, Sean.
Yeah, certainly seeing the continued growth for specialized master's degrees. And to Betty's point, do you put those in the MBA category or not? Right. I think if you looked at business analytics, for example, that has been booming, both degree and non-degree. And so is that part of an MBA package, or is it called the MBA just with another name? It seems to me what's happened over many decades. If you look at the 1970s and 80s, the MBA at that point, even into the 90s, was really a fairly exclusive elite credential. It expanded to the masses. You had a lot more part-time programs. And I'd point out until recently, and probably even still today, the ROI on those degrees for individuals was very strong. For the last decade or two, we've seen a shift toward employers maybe looking beyond just simply sending their employees out into an executive MBA program, paying for it, and hiring based on that degree. So you really need to talk, I think, about the tiers of the market as well, being a really large, diversified market with a lot of specialists and a lot of different brands and price points.
Mm-hmm. Brooke?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, demand for the MBA has never been greater. And it comes back to something that Betty said in terms of, by providing the MBA in an affordable and accessible way, learners who never would have considered pursuing an MBA now are. And that's true across the globe. And so I really think that's driving what I see as an increase in demand for an MBA. But to your point, in terms of, there also is demand for different types of credentials, right? Whether it's certificate-based credentials or other credentials that do not culminate in a degree. But also in terms of transforming a model, and we've done this by partnering with Coursera in creating stackable credentials where an individual or learner can pursue a credential and then it can stack into a degree. And I think everyone, there is value to an option, right? And so it's having those credentials that can stack into a degree, and some portion of that learner population will exercise. And so I see both of those as growing and increase the demand for the MBA going forward.
Tom, please.
So the original sort of research behind our project was really around, how much pent-up demand there is for the MBA. And it's on a scale that's much greater than the actual demand that's manifest. The two big problems are cost and then time, or needing to relocate to a campus. And the historical mismatch with MBA education was really that, you'd sort of teach someone at the age of 28 who was an individual contributor, senior leadership frameworks of, how to evaluate whether to buy a company or how to think about, pricing strategy. And then they'd come out, and if they didn't go to one of the strategic consultants or an investment bank, they ended up feeling like they didn't really have applicability for what they've been learning. And so the sort of the question in a way has this packaging of where do MBAs go today, and it's McKinsey or Goldman or those types of institutions, and those are not in the ascendant. I would say, like, there's not a need for more strategic consultants or more bankers, but what there is enormous demand for someone, let's say, who spent their educational dollars on getting a master's in computer science or a master's in bioscience of some sort, and now they've got the big idea. They're a specialist. They have no clue as to how to formulate a business plan. That's where it's shifted, and that's where the incumbents are sort of mispositioned, because they're organized around the campus, And so they're saying, please, at 38 years old, leave your job, come to us for 2 years, or shell out 150,000 and come to us on a sort of weekend program. And those things just don't fit where people are, and they want to. And sometimes the driver behind wanting an MBA, and they want the generalist education, the holistic package. They don't want the micro-credential, by and large, we're finding, is that they're pursuing an idea. They have a passion. They want the MBA to essentially help them communicate with investors or help them lead a team. And that's a very different motivator than what was the motivator, let's say 20 years ago, when people wanted to work on Wall Street or in a consulting practice.
So we'll come back to whether the MBA is the right vehicle to deliver that's to meet those needs. But Megan, what's your sense of sort of the sort of match? Because I'm interested in this. A lot of you have sort of focused on the sort of a mismatch between. We have seen a declining interest in the MBA, but it sounds like a lot of you think that's a market mismatch. Megan, is that sort of your take on it?
What I think is interesting about this conversation is that we're talking about different parts of the market. Picking up on Sean's original point, what students are really buying at the top of the market, the most elite part of the market, is different from that student who's going to a radically affordable program and perhaps looking for something that's maybe more skills-based. One of the most interesting projects I've ever done was at the earliest part of my career, and I did an online ethnography of applicants to elite business schools. And we got them to journal every other week about the application process. And through that, we were really trying to figure out, what are they really buying? Are they buying a generalist education? And in many cases, the answer is no. For the elite schools, they're buying the network, they're buying bragging rights for mom and dad, they're buying the hireability and the starting salary. And that's different than leadership skills. Undoubtedly, they were getting those out of those programs. But I think that there's sort of a deeper demand that programs need to be able to meet in order to be competitive, especially at the top of the market. Well,
so that's the thing. So it's clear. I mean, nothing's clear right now because the world is so scrambled. But the early indications we're getting, and this is maybe where is that we're seeing an early, I think, evidence of increased demand for the top MBA programs. I think that's what we're seeing so far, right? In terms of this question of whether, we see people return. And Megan, I was interested in your suggestion that the MBA has not been counter-cyclical like the rest of post-secondary historically has been. I think there's some real questions about whether the rest of higher education is going to be counter-cyclical this time around. But I think I think it is important that we talk about very different parts of the market. And Tom, the question of sort of whether if we see a decline in programs, it's not going to be the booths and it's not going to be the top programs that disappear. It's going to be the bottom of the market, like it has been in started to be in legal education. But so which parts of let's focus on Brooke, maybe it might be worth starting with you, because you're an incumbent, like Tom was talking about, but you've pivoted such that a large part of what your incumbent program is now gone in terms of at least the campus base. So maybe talk about just very briefly about sort of how you view the role of incumbent institutions and sort of what you've seen in your experiments so far and what you think it says about the rest of the market right now.
Yeah, positively. I mean, so we made the decision to spend all residential MBA programs. And I mean, it was a bold decision. I think there's no better decision we could have made. When I think about what we've gained from that, I mean, we've gained access to a global network of learners with very diverse backgrounds that have a variety of reasons for wanting to pursue an MBA. And some of them are qualified and could, get into those elite MBA programs, but they really just wanted something different. They wanted something different in terms of a return on investment. Just like Megan said, they value the network, but we have a global network that they have access to. I mean, in October, we'll cross 4,000 students enrolled in our IMBA program. And so the magnitude and the breadth and depth of the network that they have access to is unmatched, really, with residential programs. And so I think a lot of the things that individuals thought might not be of value, or an online program might not provide that value, we found it, in fact, we do it, and perhaps to a greater extent. So I really think, we've lost nothing, from suspending the residential programs in the way that we're able to serve and attract, the type of learner base that we value. At Illinois, I will point out, at Illinois, we're a land-grant institution, right? And so our mission is to serve the citizens of the state of Illinois, the nation, and the world through education. And so I think it's been something that was maybe an easier choice for us, because it's been very mission consistent. We're able to live that out every day. And we're proud, to offer a program that's consistent with the mission of our university.
So Tom, when you think about sort of where, I know Quantic has talked about being sort of more selective than some of the most selective business schools. But you don't really, do you see yourself competing with those institutions, or are you in a different part of the market?
So you see, so it's very interesting. If you look at the pie chart of students sort of enrolling at the top business schools in the world, they sort of have a business background going in. So they come from, let's say, consulting, or they're in operations or marketing or finance. That's the sort of 2/3 of students going to HBS or something like that. For us, it's the opposite. 2/3 are of a product or science background. So we get a lot of people from the biotech industry, or from the tech startups in Silicon Valley or New York or whatever. And it's an audience that's super well educated. They've gone to the top schools, but they're trying to make the transition to generalist, or to being a manager or CEO or founder or something like that. And they're trying to do it in a way that fits their desire to stay in Silicon Valley, to stay active in their work. And so it's this new segment that I think we've unlocked. And so it's not, I always sort of tell people that, if your path is to go to Bain or McKinsey or BCG, go to HBS. We don't offer what they offer. They will get you there. We probably won't. But if what you're trying to do is become a better leader and a better manager, and think through a bunch of decisions in using the frameworks that you would learn at those top schools, then we will provide that to you. And on top of that, I think very similar to what Brooke is talking about, we get the scale. And so we've got, maybe 5,000 students enrolled in our MBA programs globally. And we've got a whole network aspect to our technology that allows you to match and meet others who have similar interests. And so as that grows, and we maintain this really high sort of selectivity, you get the network benefits that you would associate with a traditional sort of top school.
So, Sean, do you think, who are these, grouping Quantic and what Brooke is doing together, they're similar, but who are those institutions, applying your market analysis? Who are those institutions? They're not hurting the HBSs of the world generally. Are they hurting that bottom third or whatever, or half of the traditional market, or is it truly a completely different set of students?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you referenced earlier this idea that there's a flight to quality, and you see that in higher education in recessions. So the elite schools, I think, are doing better, and they have their model, right? They have their selectivity and brand. But if you look at what's happened at Harvard Business School, just as one example, alongside many others in the last few years, those elite schools have now embraced online. That wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago. They were anti-online very publicly. Now they have embraced it, and they're actually moving down market. And I think that's going to have is having huge ripple effects as they offer certificates, micro-credentials, things that you might stack into some kind of a degree. But if we kind of pan back and think more broadly, and where you could put Illinois and Quantic and Purdue and Northwestern and name a school into the same category, is over the last 20 years, since the advent of online degrees from accredited institutions, I think the MBA market has broadened, and where the growth was and probably is in part-time professionals, working adults, non-selective programs, a lot of schools moving away from the GRE, and to the point today where you have, more non-institutional providers as well. So it's a really interesting moment for innovation. I think we saw this in the late 90s, early 2000s with the dot-com boom and Cardian University and Unext and things like that, where there's this moment where these new competitors are entering and you're getting kind of this interesting shakeout.
Yeah, now, Betty, your Coursera is obviously seeding, SEEDING, a lot of the experimentation around virtual programs, but also pricing in graduate education. I mean, you work with Illinois' program, you've done this. You're doing this elsewhere. Talk about the different sort of roles that Coursera is bringing with its partners. It's obviously putting for the first time in a long time real downward pressure on pricing, helping institutions bring downward pressure on pricing, not to the level that Tom's institution is at, but you're seeing reductions in pricing. Is price how does price factor among the various elements that Coursera and its partners bring?
Well, Coursera started out wanting to educate the world. Right. And we haven't moved away from that. Our MOOCs used to be free. They're not free anymore. You can't, keep doing everything for free forever. But certainly that philosophy permeates everything that we do and everything that we do with our partners. We believe that you have to scale to be successful. And yes, there are elite programs that do very elite things for elite people, but that's just not who we are. And we want to provide education to the world. So we are eager for programs like Brooke's, where folks can figure out how to afford it, where they can get an MBA at a price that many people can pay, not just the elite or the folks who ultimately end up at McKinsey & Company. Because McKinsey & Company can help you pay for your degree because you get a high salary right off the rip. That's not the way that most people leave MBA programs. They get good, decent jobs, but they have to work their way up. The other thing that really makes all this possible is that folks don't have to make that big decision all at once. Certainly the work that Brooke and Guy are doing with a master's in management before an MBA. Shorter period of time, you get the basics. If you feel after that you need to move on, you can. But it's something that you can put on your resume and improve your credential, improve your prospects much more quickly. And as Sean says, stacking and pricing all have a huge impact on whether or not these programs are going to be successful. But they can only be successful if they can scale. You can't have a $20,000 MBA if you've only got 50 students. It doesn't work. So that has to come together. And of course, Coursera can enable that because we have so many learners on our platform.
Yeah. Megan, do you believe that the in-person MBA is dead or dying?
I don't think so. I don't think it's an either or. I think the conversation we're having is a both and. And what I've been struck by is that this has become in some ways a conversation about equity, and that a lot of the conversation about inequity in higher ed is focused on the undergraduate experience, but really there's a conversation to be had, especially with radically affordable programs, about equity post-graduation. But I think the market and MBA, it is the biggest master's program out there. There is a lot of room for variation in that market. I don't think it has to be just in person or online is going to take over and eat the world, even though writ large in the master's market, it is becoming much more dominant.
Mm-hmm. So does anybody have something they want to jump in? I saw a couple of you kind of seeming itchy.
I just like what Megan said about equity. I think there's been a lot of focus on equity in the undergraduate space, but not so much in the graduate space, right? And I think the adage is education changes lives, but it doesn't if it's not accessible and affordable. And so really bringing that conversation about equity to the graduate education space, I think is something that's important, and something that, you know, many of us are very passionate about.
Mm-hmm. So this session has global in the title, and I guess I want to talk a little bit about sort of the way the MBA sort of is or isn't. The title is Reviving the Global MBA, which certainly implies that it needs some reviving. So, and I think it's clear that people have slightly different perspectives about sort of the ways that the MBA should be or can be more global. A lot of it's obviously about the student, about the enrollment, and Betty and others talked about sort of the growth of MBA programs in other countries, the situation for students coming to the US right now or studying in the US physically is constrained, let's say, by a variety of factors. What are the sort of biggest, what do we see in terms of the focus of what is happening internationally with the MBA, and what is the role of U.S. institutions in sort of ensuring that the MBA continues to has a bigger global footprint going forward? Betty, maybe start with you.
Sure. I'm not as US centric on this. I think it's really important for us to think about the world and educating everybody in the world. What does the world need? The world needs multiculturalism. The world needs sensitivity. The world needs understanding. And an MBA is a great place to develop those skills, as long as it is a program that thinks about multiculturalism, that thinks about giving people opportunities to test themselves so that they aren't just learning with people who look like they do, and they aren't just looking at companies that are the companies they see at home. And programs can do that whether or not they're in America or anywhere else, but they really have to concentrate on making that part of the experience. And that can be done through travel. Today, travel's not a possibility. It can also be done through experiences like the one we're having today, writ large. And I think it's incumbent upon good MBA programs to really think about how to make that experience one where folks have a business background with a global and a multi-local perspective. And without that, I think calling yourself a global MBA is just advertising.
And I'll ask to others, is the global MBA, is that a different flavor of MBA, or does every MBA need to have a global cast? Tom?
I'm very partial to global. I'm not American by nationality, and I went to INSEAD, which is one of the sort of original truly global MBAs. And so I think that, you know, what an MBA does is it trains you to make decision making. And obviously, if you're a bioscientist and all you want to do is have the sort of the template for communicating with your domestic team around business strategies, let's say, that are 99% rooted in, you know, existing and surviving and succeeding here in the United States, that's fine. But we try to stimulate both in terms of the student body experience and offering event experiences globally and having networks, groups, and so on that are global, because there's so much to gain from it. Blockchain as a technology is one that, let's say, has maybe more innovation outside the US than inside the US. So why limit yourself from a national perspective?
Others, Sean, Megan?
I have a pretty US centric, I'll just own that I have a US centric point of view on this. And a lot of the institutions that I work with through EAB have high hopes that there's this untapped demand for online MBA education in the US. And we're still kind of early in our inquiry there, but so far I haven't seen it. I'd like to see it, that would be great. But I don't know if that's going to quite materialize. I think some of the value of there is some value to an in-person MBA, particularly I think about some of the MBA programs, the executive MBA programs that used to be more popular, where students are really, they're executives, they're flying to different locations, they're really getting that multicultural experience, immersing themselves in different locations. And that's not necessarily what you're going to get in an online experience. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think there's also something beyond global that can be part of the MBA value proposition now. So I think about how curriculum and leadership needs to change in a remote environment. So it might even transcend location. How do you drive strategic change in a just fully distributed environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd just add the word experience has come up a lot, whether it is work experience, the experience of going overseas, the experience of, leading a team in a program. And that's where I think the experiential learning model, which business schools have kind of long been open to or embraced, and we start to think about online and simulation and just like blurring the boundary between what's happening in the workforce and in the educational program. That's a really interesting frontier, especially as more things go online. And as we've seen here in the pandemic, you can do a corporate residency online. You can do a virtual or actually a real project with a real employer. It's not quite the same as being part of an internship cohort in an office, but there's a lot of opportunity there too.
I mean, I would stress that the MBA is kind of uniquely placed among master's degree programs to be global. Business is English is the lingua franca of business. And so you can offer a master's education and have appeal to business leaders from all over the world in a way where, let's say, a master's in education might not lend itself to having, 80% of the students from overseas. In business, why not? 80% of the global business activity is non-US. So you could sort of make a case that it could be different than any other degree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think one great thing about, online MBA programs is we serve a global audience and they live and work globally, right? So we have individuals in our program from all over the world, and they wake up all over the world and operate business all over the world. And so they bring those perspectives to a classroom that you normally wouldn't have in a residential program. Typically people all over the globe converge, right, in a common location. And so I think it's a lot of value. And I love Sean's point about experiential learning opportunities. It's something that business schools, I think, have been great at. We offer global immersions where we do bring our students together in ways where they can meet and face to face, and we have those company experiences and we have those cultural experiences. And so, I think I love embracing the global aspect of the MBA, whether it's from a curriculum perspective or whether it's from a student perspective.
So, Sean and a couple of others of you brought up sort of the potential impact of COVID and the recession it has helped spawn. What are, one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is sort of what from this moment is likely to have lasting impact. What is your sense, any of you, about sort of what impact from we can predict or guess about the enrollment, but what are some of the other things that we're likely to see as potentially having sort of lasting impact from this moment on the state of business education and the MBA in particular? Anybody?
I think we've all learned how to deal with this. Here we are, and we do this, many of us, all day, every day. And business education has to help people get better at it, because that's what business is today. And, this isn't something that you can practice and get better at it, but there are also things that someone can teach you. So it's a small example, but it's a really important one, because when you're in an environment where people really know how to work with Zoom and really can teach you how to have an engaging environment instead of, big old PowerPoint up in the middle of the screen and nobody sees anybody and all they see is the PowerPoint and it's as big as your head. That's something that folks have to learn about. Now, that's a trivial example, but just the way you relate with people, the way you try to build change, you make things happen, very different in a remote environment. And while we're not going to stay completely remote forever, I truly believe that many of us will be much more remote than we've ever been once this all passes. Some of that isn't going to go back to the way it was. And it's incumbent upon our schools to help people learn how to do it better.
So that's primarily a curricular change. Is that, am I hearing you right? Or
slash experiential, right?
Sure.
Your curriculum, and then you have to try it, and you have to learn, you have to fail, and then you have to try again, and so forth.
Yeah. Others?
Well, we can expect more market consolidation. Right now, MBAs are, in the US at least, a winner takes some market with some big players, but even mid-tier players, there's a pretty high median conferral rate. I think we can expect the current environment to accelerate that trend. And the affordable programs are on pretty strong footing to do that and do that well. The other trend I think we'll continue to see is market convergence. So, maybe HBS isn't going to really feel the effects of new competitors, but I think you might start to see some of the regional public, regional private, some programs sort of competing with the large national players in ways that they haven't, and also have some of those national competitors knocking on their door in ways that they may not have anticipated.
Interesting. Sean, what were you going to add?
Just greater openness to online education. I mean, every data set I can see, this forced movement of people to where online was the only option. And certainly there have been some very bad experiences in that, as we've seen in K-12 learning and some other spots. I think it's grown the share of the market who's willing to say, you know what, I can learn online. I had to do it. I'll try it again, or I'm now more open to it. And so that shift among consumers, and I'd also point out, we haven't touched on this, among employers, right? So we've been researching for many years employer acceptance of degrees earned online, right? Think about employer acceptance of remote work arrangements prior to the pandemic. So a continued shift there, where both on kind of the buying side, if you will, or even the investment side, where an employer is hiring someone with an MBA or funding a professional to go get one, I think we're now going to see a much greater openness to online, and that's also going to open up the true global market. Of all the online degree enrollment in the US, we're still at only, in 2020, only 2% is from overseas. And if US institutions want to thrive, and if they want to compete with the institutions in the UK and China and Australia and other places who are getting very active, they're going to have to innovate.
And I would just build on what Sean said in terms of it becoming sort of accepted to everyone that you can do an online graduate degree. I wonder if some of the top 10 schools don't start offering 100% online degree, and as soon as one of them does it, you'll see others do it. It's the dynamic that they exist in. And so I would project that by 2025, it's not unlikely that 5 out of the top 10 schools offer a fully online MBA. And the moment they do that, their scale will go up, but they will effectively start cannibalizing, as happened with the University of Illinois, their physical program, and that will sort of do a snowball of the entire MBA category, where it shouldn't matter so much, in my opinion, whether it's online or physical, that you're getting the education. Downstream, it should all be hybrid and essentially. So
yes, I mean, but so we have, so one of the questions from our audience, and we have just a couple of minutes left, is we've talked about the demand side of innovative MBA programs with greater access. Have employers embraced these new signals yet? What will it take to get there? Does each new program need to build an incredible brand and alumni network to build the same hiring confidence? In the upcoming future, would an online MBA be given as much credibility to the offline institution-based MBA? Sean, Megan, maybe what are your thoughts on that? Because this is certainly the function what we've seen elsewhere. But Sean, you implied we've continued to see it in the MBA, or at least.
Yeah, the big shift for online degrees in general was when you had the top-ranked universities in the world began offering fully online programs. So just as Tom referenced, as we see more of that, and I've done a lot of interviewing and surveying of employers on this, they see it as, okay, this is an MBA from that respected institution. I trust their process. What I worry about is if we see a bifurcation, which historically we haven't had, but with the Boston University example maybe there are some others where there's an online version with a slightly different curriculum and price point and standards and something else. And maybe that's a bit of an outlier, but as we likewise see the proliferation of different kinds of certificates and credentials, and an employer, a hiring manager, it's hard to sort that out versus where you have scale and where you have clarity in making that decision.
I think part of it comes in just your growing alumni network, right? So we crossed 1,000 alums out of the MBA program in August, and right, they work in Fortune 500 companies, like global companies. And I think when employers see, how the Illinois education transforms, what they're able to do from a leadership perspective, they put their money where their mouth is, right? And I think we have seen a shift in more of an acceptance of just the degree, irrespective of the format in which you earned it.
I think too, when you move away from the top 10, maybe the top 20, there's also regional strength. Even though many programs are online, most students still go to programs that are within a few hundred miles of where they live. And that will play itself out. So if you live in Florida and you go to the University of Florida online MBA program, if you decide to stay in that region as a working adult, you're going to be just fine. Whereas if you're in Calcutta, maybe not so much. And I think that's why we're seeing more, I don't want to call them second tier, but not top 10 MBA programs around the world that have good substantive programs with good enrollments for their regional audiences. I think that's going to happen, and it's not going to stop, because there's something about, I know somebody who went to XYZ University and they did a good job.
Right. What it probably means, though, is that there may only be one or maybe two strong programs in every state or region of the U.S. Whereas, where Illinois and Brooke, I don't know how good your data are, who you're cannibalizing the most, but I'm guessing that you've hurt Eastern and Western and other the other Illinois campuses, pretty strongly. But so we're down to the last couple minutes. So this is from somebody who's admitted to be biased. How important are the in-person components and consistent relationship building in MBA programs, and how can they be replicated online? Obviously, those of you who are involved in online probably would maybe don't think there is. But Brooke, maybe when are there things where you said you haven't lost anything by moving online? Is that really true? Have you been able to replicate everything?
I mean, I think so. It's through, I think just innovation in technology. We've made huge investments from an infrastructure perspective, from a technology perspective, from an e-learning perspective. And so we use all types of different technologies to replicate what you typically have in a traditional classroom. And we think that it's more engaging a lot of times in a virtual classroom. But we have expanded the portfolio of offerings. So we have global immersions, we have meetups, we have iConnects, where we come together and provide opportunities.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. We're done.